On behalf of VMware and CARAHCAST, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around VMware Carbon Black, where Jared Myers, Senior Manager of the Threat Analysis Unit, and Brendan DeMeo, Senior Solution Engineer at VMware, will discuss how VMware Carbon Black can build a better endpoint detection and response program.
All right, thanks. I was going to let Brendan introduce himself, kind of go over the agenda, and then we'll kind of hop right into the content. So,
Cool. Sounds good. So, of course, my name is Brendan DeMeo. I've been with VMware, well, the Carbon Black team specifically, for about a half decade now, of course, through the VMware acquisition of Carbon Black. Prior to that, I was in the U.S. Army. And, I'll be giving you an overview of the Carbon Black offerings, as well as going over the executive order and demoing Carbon Black EDR, Carbon Black Cloud EDR later. Really, to kick things off, we're going to be going over some specific threats facing federal agencies today with Jared Myers, who, of course, is a senior manager on our threat analysis unit. And we'll map basically some of what he says to Carbon Black EDR and how we can address those things from an EDR standpoint and also potentially from a prevention standpoint as well. Jared?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. As Brendan said, I'm the senior manager over TAL, which is the threat analysis unit. Brendan and I were talking, and he asked me to come on and present some of the threats that we were seeing specifically in kind of the federal agency space. So I've put together, I guess, some of the trends that we've seen, as well as kind of some of the specifics and some of the projects that my group in particular is doing to try to make sure that we're kind of on top of the latest tactics and techniques and things like that. And then I'll hand it back over to Brendan. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is ransomware in general. Ultimately, I think whether you are kind of private sector, you're in the commercial space, you're in the government space, whatever it is, ransomware has kind of continued to be like this thorn in everyone's side. And to be honest with you, I feel like the velocity at which ransomware as a service, kind of this whole model is going, is just ramping up rapidly. Where this comes into play, and we get a lot of questions like, is ransomware targeting any certain vertical, like any type of specific like state or local federal level? And the answer is, like, to be honest with you, like, ransomware actors are just kind of targeting everything. To be honest with you, what we've seen kind of specifically in like the federal or state space is where some of these actors, sometimes when they're just doing their typical scanning, like, let's just scan everything, let's spray all the passwords, let's do all the things that we do in every day, they just come across assets that they can get into, whether it's from some known vulnerabilities, compromised or weak credentials, whatever it is. And then they try to figure out, like, where am I? What am I doing? And they kind of like start to assess what is the value of this target and things like that. And sometimes they find themselves in, like this federal or other like government space. At which point it's interesting, from some of the IRs that we've had visibility into, some of the incidents that people have kind of shared with us and things like that. It's interesting how quickly it can get fairly aggressive once they find out they're in kind of a high value target versus just kind of a run-of-the-mill, like smaller business, home entity, something like that, that may not have kind of as good of a return from them in that standpoint. So typically when they get in there, we see kind of the actors switch very quickly to kind of some second and kind of third stage malware that we don't typically see. Ultimately, like, all this access a lot of times is sold off, and kind of the bigger the better. It goes for like higher dollar things and like that. But one of the things we keep kind of telling people, on this ransomware is kind of starting with the basics. Whether you are kind of a very small retail shop, whether you are a commercial entity, whether you are in the government space, like, starting with the basics is just the biggest thing with ransomware. Like, all the things that you you should be doing, but it's hard to keep up with, whether it's patching vulnerabilities, making sure that like there's nothing like hanging off the internet that people can RDP into, or that may have like specific services open that you didn't intend to. Kind of those routine checks, ongoing maintenance and checks of that, I see as kind of one of the biggest like initial steps to just kind of warding this off. A lot of times what we see in ransomware, at least like this large scale, kind of attacks, is it's very opportunistic. They're just, throwing out big nets every day, every hour of every day, and they're just pulling back in to see what they get. And sometimes they're in small businesses, sometimes they're in big businesses, sometimes they land right in the middle of, some type of network segment on, some government, whether it's state or federal or whatever else, and they can sell it off very quickly. preventing the spread with this, and I'll talk more about this kind of as I talk about some of the living off the land and the custom rats that we've been seeing, is the biggest thing when it comes to ransomware. Like having a vulnerable server, it happens. Like it does. It happens. But if you can limit the quickness, the availability, the potential of where they can kind of move north, south, east, west, like all those things, like that's a huge point to say, like, yes, someone got in this like weird segment. It's a legacy segment. We knew that it was older, like it was a known risk. However, all they could do is get in there and it was fairly contained. We were able to identify it quickly and kind of turn around is like a huge piece to that. And let's talk about kind of pivots into the next thing when we talk about like some of the like vulnerabilities and things like that. We see a lot of what we'd call like advanced attacks, 0 days, and I lump kind of a lot of things into 0 days, whether it's like actual like CVEs, whether it's more like third party attacks where they're getting into some kind of other product that you may use inside your environment, and then it gets inside of there. Typically, those are not known. It comes out. It's treated as kind of a 0 day. But I mean, we just continue to see this. If all of you remember, like it was basically this time last year, like SolarWinds was starting to pop off. And since then, we've had kind of a barrage of these attacks kind of ongoing.